I will turn the mic over to one of ICDC's co-research directors, Garry Hnatowich, and let him begin.
Good, thanks, Kelly. And again, I'd like to welcome everyone to the 25th annual conference. This is annually hosted by SIPA and ICDC. I'd like to spend the next 15 minutes or so giving you basically a high-level overview of the ICDC Field Research Program that occurred in 2020, and basically a bit of an overview too as to the 2021 research program that we are planning that is, in development at this point in time. I think, suffice to say that this global pandemic has affected each and every one of us. Certainly the fact that we are, as Kelly alluded to, we're sitting here on a Teams meeting as opposed to an in-person conference in Moose Jaw, is testimony to the fact that we've all been affected by this global pandemic. And certainly ICDC has not been immune to this whatsoever. Suffice to say that the 2020 field research program was dramatically reduced from the program that we'd intended to have say by March 1 of this year. 2021 is in development, but the whole situation continues to be fluid. So we're not entirely, there's no guarantee as to what 2021 will actually look like. Again, though, I think what we can do is adopt, lessons and protocols that we established from this past field season and apply those to the coming field season. So we'll start with basically 2021 or 2020. Realize that there's probably some new irrigators on the program today that are not as familiar with the whole CSIDC, the Canada Saskatchewan Irrigation Diversification Center, or ourselves, ICDC. Too many acronyms, too many initials. But really, there's the CSIDC, Canada Saskatchewan Irrigation Diversification Centers, is based out of or located at Outlook, Saskatchewan. This is a federal institution in that Ag Canada owns the land, they own the infrastructure, so the above ground pivots that you see, and they own the buildings. They've got the lion's share of the equipment on the station itself. But out of the research stations in Saskatchewan, and Ag Canada has facilities at Indian Head, Outlook, Scott, Melfort, Saskatoon, and Swift Current. Out of all of these research stations, Outlook is unique in that it's a partnership. And the partners that are involved within the station are obviously the federal government, the provincial government, the University of Saskatchewan, and then two farmer or farm-owned groups, SIPA and ICDC. And we do operate as, there's an executive management team and a structure involved in this partnership. ICDC, for example, has an occupancy agreement that entitles us to a certain amount of land base and the use of office space, etc. at the station. So it is unique, and it's testimony to, all levels, all of the partners, that this is a well-run working relationship. So ICDC operates out of this station. We do follow the rules and regulations that are in place for federal employees. So, what happens with one can affect all of the others. And that was certainly the case as we entered into 2020. As the pandemic developed earlier in the year, the entire nation and CSIDC went into basically a shutdown mode in the middle of March. At that time, Ag Canada made the decision to close the research station, and rightly so. We did not know what the outcome of this pandemic was going to be, and we still don't. So in terms of human safety and concerns, there was a shutdown. ICDC staff was asked to leave the premise. At that point in time, there are 4 of us that were located on station. We removed our computers, whatever, records and files that we were required to take, and moved off station. For example, Brenda Joyce, our administrator, left mid-March, and she has not been back on station since. That occurred as I say, mid-March, and at about that very same time, beginning of April, we welcomed Aaron Carpenden, who is jointly sharing the role of research director with myself. The intent there is Aaron came on to join us, and her and I would work together for the next couple field seasons, and then I would be, transferring into a retirement, so that Aaron would be taking over as the full-time research director. So, just in time for a shutdown, Aaron joins ICDC. We were at this point in time still fully prepared to move ahead with some type of field research program. We were uncertain what that might look at, but we did have things that had to be accomplished. Without an operating facility to work out of, we scrambled. And as a consequence, we rented from the town of Outlook their recplex, or a portion of the recplex. In fact, we were operating on the floor of the hockey arena. And we used that space. We moved equipment. In particular, we had just taken possession of a new plot seeder that ICDC had fabros with current manufacturer over the course of the winter. And it had been delivered late February. So literally, it was, the paint was still fresh, and we ended up having to move equipment, etc., from the research station over to the recplex. And there we continued to work on that drill, doing calibrations on it, and starting to set up our seed for a research program. The year continued, and as protocols were being developed, there was an issue regarding shared equipment and the use of equipment being shared between various parties, and potential contamination of that usage. So ICDC made the decision that we would purchase a plot tractor. So we tendered out or shopped around and ended up, the board of directors allowed us to purchase 52 horsepower plot seeder, or plot tractor, to go with the seeder. With discussions as a partnership, again, the station opened to some extent in mid-May, but we were restricted in terms of the number of trials that were allowed to be established on station, and we also faced staffing level adjustments. So, the number of trials that we typically would put out in any given year on the research station as a whole were dramatically reduced. My Ag Canada colleagues were allowed a single trial each. The University of Saskatchewan was not allowed to enter the research station this year, so they had no presence. Our ICDC fared better. We were given permission to establish about a dozen trials, which we did get in. Staffing levels as a whole were reduced to about 30% of normal staffing levels for a field season. Typically at CSIDC, between all of the partners, we had typically about 30 people working there during the summer. 30% of 30 people is roughly nine individuals. ICDC was given permission to have our four full-time staff, 4 of the 5. So myself, Dr. Aaron Karpinen, Ted Nodge, and Damien Lee were allowed to access this station throughout the summer. Obviously, we are not allowed to hire summer students this year. And that alone, caused a significant reduction in what we could physically conduct in terms of the size and scope of the program. So as I say, it was limited to us 4 full-time field people. The intent was at the beginning of the year was to rent an additional 40 acres of ground off station. As we looked at reductions in the program, we reduced that rented acreage off station from 40 down to 5.5 acres. In addition, we do have and have had 12 acres of town land that we've been renting now for about 5 years. So we had access to those 12 acres too. I want to point out right now that we give a special thank you to Grant Peterson, who allowed us. The original intent was we would rent 40 acres from Grant. He kindly allowed us to renege on that agreement and back it down to the 5.5 acres and put up with the inconvenience, of having to work around us. So a special thank you to Grant. And also a special thank you to the 4 individuals, the Ag Canada staff that I highlight here, Barry Vestry, Alan McDonald, Daryl Jacobson, and Richard Wagner. These were the full 4 Ag Canada staff that were allowed on station for the duration of the season. Without their assistance, we could not have accomplished what we did. Again, this is a reflection that this is a partnership arrangement, and these individuals truly adhered to the spirit of that agreement throughout the course of this season. So thank you to them. So what did we end up with? On the left of the screen, you can see a pie chart of what our intent was at the 1st of April, or the 1st of March of this year. We had hoped to establish 61 individual trials throughout the season. Now that 61 trials encompasses a total of about 50 different research projects, because some of those projects had multiple sites associated with them. But there would be 60 individual research trials established was the intent. Out of that, 9 of those trials would have been classified as fruit and vegetable type of trials. 27 would be categorized as varietal trials, and 25 would be classified as agronomy studies. What we ended up achieving is on the right. And you can see we established out of the intended 61, we managed to get 29. We established, we are able to achieve roughly just shy of 50% of what we intended. Our staffing level was at less than 50% of what we intended. So, actually, I'd like to compliment, my staff, the 3 other field people that were involved with this. Worked hard, and we are quite pleased with what we are able to do. I should also point out that the variety, or the fruit and vegetable trials, I want to give a special thank you to Connie Timachuk, to Kara Drury, and to Forrest Sharp with the Ministry of Agriculture. They were the ones, along with actually Doug Water, who's a professor emeritus with the University of Saskatchewan. They actually were heavily involved with the fruit and vegetable trials. We had limited involvement with those studies this year. So, of the variety trials, I'm not going to talk about the fruit and vegetable. Kara Drury is going to discuss a portion of those trials this year in her overview. So I'll highlight on the variety trials and on the agronomy, and I'm not going to go in depth with these, but within the varieties this year, our variety trials were limited to wheat, and I've got in brackets here all classes, meaning we tested both winter wheat and spring wheat varieties, and within the spring wheat we had all market classes. So we were testing, hard red spring, general purpose, soft whites, you name it, it was in the mix. The so-called, bred wheats and high yielding wheats, market classes. In addition, we looked at durum, we looked at barley, both feed and malt. We looked at oats, fall rye, and flax. What we were unable to accomplish this year was any variety trials with respect to canola, field pea, dry bean, faba bean, or soybean. We had a number of these trials, for example, the canola, that were unconducted. Those trials, for example, canola, we are hoping to do the canola performance trials for both the conventional and the straight cut trials, that the Canola Council puts out. They did not want to lose site locations in 2020, so our trial was outsourced and given to some other research group to conduct. I am really hopeful that we can reclaim for ICDC those canola trials next year, but that is uncertain. There's no guarantee that that will occur. So there have been, or maybe, ramifications on us for the field program for our inability to be able to conduct these trials in future years. That being said, Aaron and I are in the process of completing the crop varieties through irrigation. We should have this wrapped up and completed, the 2021 edition, by the end of this week. It will go to the printers. There will be a mail out again occurring in January, but an online version will be available at Irrigation Saskatchewan, the website for ICDC and SIPA. I will point out, though, that again, the only real changes in the 2021 will be in the cereals and the flax. The other commodity, other varieties or other market or classes of crops will just be a carbon copy of this year's. So, as I said, the crop variety through irrigation is about to be finalized. Within the agronomy program, fortunately, we had a number of funded research trials that we were allowed to defer until 2021 on establishing those trials. And what I mean there, for example, in the previous year, in 2019, we had an aphanomycetes trial on field peas that the pulse growers were funding. That was supposed to be conducted again in 2020. We were unable to do that, so they've deferred that, and we will pick that trial up and restart it again in 2021. Conversely, we had a number of ADF grants and corn trials. We had an ADF corn and an ADF dry bean study that was supposed to be initiated and started in 2020. The funding agencies have allowed us to push that off, and we will initiate those studies in the coming field season. Unfortunately, though, there were a number of projects, primarily adopt type of studies, that were forfeited. These were joint studies that we had going on with a number of other cooperators. Those cooperators were able to conduct those studies and weren't willing to forgo a year, basically. So they went ahead, and we've simply lost those trials. We are no longer involved, and as a consequence, we've lost the funding from those trials too. Just a sample of the trials that we did get in, and this is not inclusive by any stretch, but we looked at, we had a couple trials with spring wheat and winter wheat for our nutrient management studies. Those were primarily nitrogen fertilizer studies. We had a study where we looked at increasing wheat protein with either UAN, liquid UAN, or dissolved urea. And we applied those two products at various times, either at the boot or after flowering. And we looked at different types of applications, either a dribble band or actually as a foliar spray. We had a study where we looked at certified seed, 3 lots of hard red spring certified seed, and we compared that to the same varieties obtained on farm and at least 2 years out from certification. So it's basically farm saved versus a certified seed evaluation. We had a double cropped winter cereal program where we looked at planting fall rye, winter triticale, and winter wheat, and we harvested for forage those 3 cereals in late June, early July, and then immediately planted spring barley onto those plots and took the barley to a forage yield. We're looking at insecticide applications, timing and seeding date of lentils and peas with special emphasis on pea aphid damage. So we had 3 different times of seeding for the lentil and field pea, and different timings of application, either pre-flower or post-flower, and we conducted sweeps and collected pea aphids all the way through the season on all of those combinations and permutations. We've got a study that is going on with the University of Saskatchewan, and it involves all 8 agroarm sites across Saskatchewan. Virtually, all soil testing labs have now been privatized. We don't really know how or when they develop their nitrogen fertilizer recommendations, so we're revisiting nitrogen. We're developing nitrogen yield response curves to compare, our curves to what's presently suggested or recommended, and we're doing that with both wheat and canola. Crop rotation benefits of annual forages preceding spring cereals. This is an interesting study that we initiated this year with Swift Current. They're doing a dryland site. We're doing an irrigated site. We had as many as 12 different species of annual forages. And we put them into mixtures with as many as 8 of those in any single mixture. And we had, I think, 7 or 8 different mixtures. For example, we had what we called a legume mixture, and it involved a number of species, such as, get a list here, Persian clover, forage pea, and hairy vetch. We had what we called a weed mixture that looked at, again, a mix of forage pea, oat, hunter radish, Winifred radish, and purple top turnip. All of these mixtures went in. We took a forage cut at the end of the season, or throughout this, during the season, I should say. And the intent is that we will come in and plant spring wheat on top of those plots next year and look at soil quality parameters revolving around these annual forages and whether there are benefits. We also had an intercrop study where we looked at faba bean and corn. Again, this is the study that was repeated under dryland conditions at Swift Current. All these reports and others that I'm not talking about will be available in our annual research and demonstration report. And we will hopefully complete that by the end of February. And again, it can be found on our website. Let's move in or transition into 2021. As I say, the situation remains fluid. It is still kind of a moving target. And I guess our philosophy at this point in time is we are hoping for the best, but we're planning on the worst. I want to talk about next year, 2021. For those of you not familiar with us, explain a little bit about how the partnership does work and the land-based issue that we face. The research station at Outlook, the federal land is outlined here in black highlight. So you can see here they have approximately 200 acres adjacent to the town of Outlook that we can utilize for plot research. ICDC just recently signed an occupancy agreement with the federal government, and for the first time we were allocated specific land allocation within the confines of the federal land base. And that agreement gave us access to what we call Field 12, or Field 8, which is highlighted in red, Field 12. Now, Field 12 here, you can see, if you can see my pointer, you know, there are areas here that are affected by salinity, there is slope, etc. So really, if you were to draw a line from the lower left to the upper right corner, that's about the usable area of this land that is available for research purposes. Field 8 is a nice parcel of land. Most of it is available to us, except for a small edge on the southern extremes. It's got a little bit of salinity. Over and above the allocation on station, a number of years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, we entered into an agreement with the town of Outlooks. Oh, sorry. We also, you know, have permission to utilize the nursery area of the research station, and this is where we use, that is used primarily for the fruit and vegetable program or component of our program. In addition, as I say, a number of years ago, we entered into a long-term lease arrangement with the town of Outlook that gave us access to this 12-acre parcel of land that is highlighted in yellow. And that is, you know, it's adjacent, contiguous with the research station, so is nicely positioned. Over and above this land, about 1.5 miles away, the federal government owns another quarter section, and ICDC was given access to the top, the northeast quadrant here of that 160 acres. So we've got 40 acres here. However, this is not ideal research ground. It's basically beach sand blown over on top of clay. There is terrain features, slopes, depressions, and a fair amount of salinity scattered throughout this entire field. This northeast corner, for all intentional purposes, I tried to draw an arc in here, but really the only suitable place of ground in here is this outer tower area that you can see, hopefully see my mouse pointer moving across. So it is limited as to what we can actually do. To the point where, for the last number of years, the total AFC land allocation to ICDC, plus that 12 acres of town land that we've got, is just simply insufficient for the size of the program that we presently have. So what we've been doing is jury rigging for the last number of years and renting 40 acres of additional land from a local producer. This is really ICDC's Achilles heel, is twofold. It's purchase or land acquisition, land availability, put it that way, that handicaps us and really does potentially impact our strategic planning and, you know, our continued success. And the other thing that we are shy on is infrastructure in terms of equipment. The board of directors have looked at addressing this issue seriously. We have actually put tenders out on land, but we have been unsuccessful to that so far. So what happened about this time last year? Brenda Joyce, I had Brenda arrange a meeting with the town administrator and the mayor of Outlook. And the four of us met to have some initial discussions, and we brought a proposal to them to allow us to, you know, or for them to consider allowing us to rent some additional land that the town owned adjacent to the research station. And it's just this large parcel right here. The intent was to get about 130 acres of ground here. The reason that it's dry land right now, it's locally or had been locally rented out to a local producer. But you can see there's a runway, there's a grass airport here. And the original intent was this runway was built for fixed wing aircraft, air ambulance basically to land. With the advent of STARS coming into the province, the local hospital has a heliport that the STARS helicopter can land at. So the airport has kind of become redundant, and it has very, very limited use. The town has also got some plans for a portion of this, so the timing was right. The bottom line was, as of November 1st, we entered into a long-term 15-year lease agreement for 100 acres of ground adjacent to the research station. This will alleviate to some extent, the concerns that we have with land availability. To that, we have recently, in fact, as of last Friday, they plowed and laid pipe out on the ground, but the board of directors has approved of the purchase of a linear irrigation system that was tendered out and awarded to a local company. They are presently constructing that. So this will give us additional land base. There's still work to be done. As we go through into 2021, we need to complete the linear. We need power hooked up to it. We need the trenching to it. We will tie in directly to the pressurized line that the station presently uses. The pump house has the capacity to handle this linear. We need to look at that 100-acre and partition it into appropriate rotation blocks. We need to figure out how to integrate this with the partnership as a whole. We do not view this as ICDC ground. This is ground acquired for the partnership. There's additional infrastructure requirements, fencing, roadways, access points, all of that have to be considered. So 2021 will be a transitional year in that we will accomplish all of the above items and have it in place and ready to go for research trials initiating in 2022. So to get us through into this next coming field season, we again have arranged for a 40-acre parcel of land off station with Roger Peterson. So we will establish the bulk of our research trials, we suspect, on that ground next year. Towards that end, this is where we presently sit at next year's program. We are looking at roughly what we had hoped to accomplish this past year. So we're back up to 71 research trials, of which 9 would be considered fruit and vegetable, 31 trials each for variety evaluations and for agronomy. Again, a total of about 50 individual projects in its entirety. Next year, ICDC is also the host of the Minister of Agriculture's 2021 Crop Diagnostics School. It will be a virtual diagnostic school. We do not envision this as being in person this year, so it will be a repeat of what occurred this year at Redvers. But there will be plots that have to be established for it, so we're looking forward to hosting that. Out of these, all of these trials, these 50 projects, we have, some of them we have secured funding for, but a good chunk of them, the majority, the funding is still uncertain. We don't know if we have been successful in obtaining those funds as of yet. We won't know that until towards the end of February. But we do have in play in excess of $300,000 in grant requests out there that would enable us to conduct these trials.